Hi, I'm Jeff Arnell, the Executive Director of Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center, and welcome to today's Faith and Arts conversation with the composer, poet, and performer, Jerome Ellis. Thanks for joining us today, Jerome.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
We often start these conversations with an early experience, an early kind of significant, kind of memorable, religious or spiritual experience that you might want to share with us.
Yes, yeah, thank you for asking. Well, one is definitely my ongoing experiences as a child growing up in my family's church. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, but most of my extended family growing up, they lived in and around New York City, and my mom's family had and still has a church in Brooklyn, New York, and so I would go there a lot. You know, as a child, we would visit, and my aunt and my grandfather were the pastors, among others, and I think for me they were these experiences of being in this church and watching my aunt and my grandfather um, preach in these lineages of um, they came from Jamaica, and lineages of Afro-Caribbean and African American um, preaching and music making in church were I think very formative for me, and the way that um, both of them, both my aunt and my grandfather you know would turn, for me it felt like they would turn a single verse, from the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament, and turn that verse into an opportunity to gather as a congregation inside of for me off over time. It felt for me that there was an invitation to gather inside of the text, and they would loop parts of the text, say words over and over again, phrases over and over again, stretch things out, sing certain parts, all these tools that African and African American, Afro-Caribbean ministers use to approach the text. So this this form of music and speaking and reading and gathering are, all very formative for me. Yeah.
Amazing. I What a beautiful memory. I wonder if you might share just a little bit more about, if you could remember anything specific or more specific about the music and this kind of these kind of convergence of cultures and of places and times, really. You know, does anything come to mind?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Well, I remember that as in many forms of church, and um, I remember even as a very young child knowing that the music came first. You know, I'm 5 years old. My brother is 1 year old, and we have a huge family. So um, how we got to church was, one aunt would take us, or another aunt would take us, or our mom would take us on the bus, or an uncle would take us. But somehow we ended up, we arrived at the church, and it was clear that service began with the music, and the music was often played from in the 90s, played from CDs over over the loudspeakers, and they would have a printed booklet with lyrics for the songs. And I remember noticing that sometimes we would reach the end of the song on the CD and then go on to the next song, and the next song would be in the booklet. But so often we would reach the end of the first song and then loop it, and then
Mm.
do it again, and then loop it again. And sometimes, it was hard for me to predict how long the praise and worship, as it was called, as it is called, the praise and worship, part of the service would go. I feel like sometimes it could be 20 minutes, sometimes it could be 40 minutes. And I was so curious as a child as like how the decision to loop it was made, because it was, and the person who was running running the sound and standing next to the CD player was another aunt of mine. Um, and yeah, and it was very, very much like she was like a DJ.
Mm.
And a lot of this music that was played was gospel music from the Caribbean, as well as I imagine gospel music from the United States. But I remember a lot of it was from the Caribbean, and then sometimes my aunt would or often my aunt would sing along over the microphone, and then the congregation would sing along. So that's one form of music. But another form of music would be like further on in the service during the sermon. You know, my grandfather would be preaching, and then one of the members of the congregation would start singing,
Mm.
um, spontaneously, and then everybody would, they would start singing, His Eyes on the Sparrow or something like that, and everybody would sing a verse or two, and then come to, some kind of cadence, as you said earlier, um, uh, talking about how we might end, how we might end our conversation, the finding together of a cadence, which I find such a beautiful process in music making in general, like how groups of people come to a close. And then, my grandfather then would keep on preaching. And that form of music making, I find so beautiful. It really, for me, it really taught me that it's very much, it's not like um like how in some theatrical settings, there's the actors on the stage who are talking, and the audience is for the most part silent. It wasn't like that. It was like my grandfather's on the pulpit, but anyone can guide the sermon, is how it felt. So that was another form of music. And then my third one was when I started learning how to play the saxophone. From the moment I started, basically, I would when I would visit this church, I would play a hymn
Mm.
on the saxophone, even when I could hardly even play a note. And always they were like, so, always the congregation so supportive, so, they would clap so loud, and I would stand at the front and play a hymn, um, usually without a microphone. And it's a pretty small church, so the sound would carry. But yeah, yeah. And then there was another member of the congregation who would often sing a song as part of the service. Like she would come up
Mm.
and offer a song. Sometimes while the offering was being collected, so she would sing, and she would often have a backing track on a CD. Um, and those performances were so beautiful, and I aspired to be like her when I would play my saxophone, and I could never. She was amazing. So yeah, that's some of the music.
Sounds wonderful, incredible. I mean, it connects to so many things that I know about your work, and then I'm learning about your work and what we've talked about in our kind of earlier conversations. Something right off the top is this idea of time, and
Mhm.
stretching time. I grew up Catholic, and so in a Catholic service is like clockwork, you know. And it's very much, where you're going to be. Even if you dropped in at 23 minutes in, you would know exactly where you were going to be. And so this
Yeah.
idea of what you talk about, I read one of your artist statements for the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, and this idea of stretching time and looping time, and kind of really kind of using in your work, as through your practice, kind of considering time and all the other possibilities. I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, but I think it's really beautiful.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely. The the service length was variable. I remember going on Easter and being like, wow, I think we're in for like a 3 4 hour 5 hour service, which I find so beautiful, the way. But yeah, time, it felt like, and maybe there were strictures around it that I was not aware of, as a child. But things felt for me, yeah, very very loose, and also, like, or loose, but also loose and flexible, and like, and subject to the movement of the spirit,
Mm.
you know um and it was like, I love that there were these boundaries. The service would always end with a benediction that my grandfather would pronounce, the benediction prayer from the beginning, from the altar, and then he would walk towards the back. And then it was like, for me, it felt like when he reached the back, that was when the service was over, that. And then I could, like, kind of exhale in a way. But then we often would then, there's often, then there's like fellowship in the church, and then it spills out onto the sidewalk. It's a storefront church, and it would spill onto the sidewalk. You might go to the deli next door and get a snack because you're like so hungry from the service. And then we would then, like, pile into different cars to go to my grandparents' apartment, like a 10-minute drive away,
Mhm.
and continue the fellowship. So there were these boundaries. And then, as I said, like, often the service for me, it felt like it began as soon as the, like, first note from the speaker played, um, of of the CD. Um, but I feel like, it reminds me of, I'm thinking about this year um as what has been talked about this year as the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And I'm thinking about all the ways that hip hop artists have um developed to alter what has been given, to alter
Mm.
recordings that already exist through, of course, sampling and looping and chopping and screwing, um, and all these different forms of, yeah, of, to me, like, asserting that what is given is not the only way of doing things. And I think about that in terms of music and time, like, you know, like like DJ Screw, who himself, of course, is taking hip hop recordings and making hip hop or taking hip hop recordings that have taken other recordings in order to make those recordings, and then he's taking those recordings and altering them further. And those if Tupac is taking a sample from a funk record, um, and altering that sample in some way, and to reveal to us further spaces within that music, in the way that I think about the way that my aunt, my grandfather would like sometimes preach an entire sermon on like two sentences
Mm.
from from the Hebrew Bible, that for me it would show, if I just read those two sentences, in my bedroom, I might get something out of it, but they would, in taking and lingering with it and tarrying with it and looping certain parts of the verses, and you know they would reveal, and like to me the images of like of stretching something in order to make space. um
Mhm.
that it reminds me of, yeah, of you know yeah, someone like Salt and Pepper doing that with the sample, and then a DJ Screw further opening that and showing other possibilities. So yeah, I think there are various ways that Black people have developed to, as the historian Saidiya Hartman writes about, of like making space within an an enclosure. Um, you know, um, yeah, and you know, different practices around limbo, as limbo being a way of, um, limbo being a practice that grows from experiences entering the hold of a slave ship, and how
Mm.
Black people are able to take this, obviously very, this experience of trauma, and transform it into something. Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. I think that my understanding of a lot of the music and art in the 20th century is in relating to this is exactly that. I'm thinking of jazz standards and hymns, and kind of how many times can a different artist create something completely fresh from the same standard, and stretching it. When Miles Davis, in whatever band he's in, takes something and it ends up being completely fresh and unique. And what I admire so much about so many of artists, hip hop artists that are using technology, is the idea of access and democracy too. And I think that that's something as well. Not now, there are fewer instruments in schools, and so we know this part of the history too. That what tools are available for creative folks to express themselves, and that's when you get this completely new chapter. But it's much in the same. I mean, Bach did it. We were talking in our earlier conversation about your interest in counterpoint, and that was it as well. Whatever was the music or available at the time, popular even, say, that would be weaved in and out as kind of almost a nod or whatever. And I think it continues, and it is completely inspiring. I would love to go back to something that we mentioned or talked about in the earlier conversation, this kind of bigger idea that comes from your earlier experiences about exactly this, narratives, but then also healing. And then you really spent some time. I found it fascinating to hear you talk about fellowship and the way that you think about fellowship within your art practice.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah. Yes, I think well, I I mean I have spoken with a stutter for, nearly all of my life. And one of the ways that the stutter has, kind of guided me in my life is it has it for most of my life I really avoided talking with other people because talking was very very there's certain forms of labor that the stutter um that the way the stutter interacts with ableism, that I for most of my life, felt that the stutter was um a burden and a problem, um you know because of ableism, and because of that I felt very I really avoided talking with other people. But I once wanted to uh wanted to fellowship, so I sought out, you know nonverbal ways of fellowshipping with people, listening and being with people in silence, and but also like playing music with other people where I didn't have to talk. Um and also, I developed, very close relationships with, plants and animals, and other beings with whom I didn't have to speak in order to feel like I was communing with them. Um, and now, nowadays I, I no longer feel the stutter as a burden or a problem. I feel, quite the opposite. It is for me a gift. And um, now I'm interested in stuttering as a like, what forms of fellowship can the stutter invite me and others into, and one of the things that teaches me about that is, again, these experiences in my family's church. Because, you know it's like what I was saying earlier about, like, the way that they would preach felt like they would make all this room for, for the congregation, something as familiar as call and response, that
Mm.
they would use so much call and response, so they would, my aunt would would say the verse, um you know even something, and God said, let there be light. She might say that, and God said, let there be light. And then she might start it over and say, and God said, let there be. And of course, hold open that space for the congregation, to invite the congregation to say light. And that, and so many forms of that, it just, you know that is, to me, is such a powerful form of fellowship, that the the singular voice of my aunt gives way to, the 30 voices of the congregation. And I see so many parallels between that and the way that stuttering manifests in my body, because of course it often manifests, again, like my aunt Cynthia saying, let there be, and then there's a pause. Stuttering often manifests for me as a kind of pause. And so like it leads me to investigate like what does that pause make possible? What you know what kinds of fellowship can be invited into that pause? That I think it has a particular it's particular with stuttering in my life because the stutter of course is largely involuntary. So um, so that pause is, it's like I usually don't get to choose where that pause happens. So, for example, there's this story that I often tell where when I was working at the law library at Columbia University in New York, I was once meeting one of my coworkers, and we approached each other and we shook hands, and they said their name, and then I went to say my name, and as I often do, I often um, stutter when saying my name, and so I just so we held hands and they waited, very very patiently, very kindly, and I probably stuttered for at least I probably was just like silent, for at least 30 seconds, and which is not a long time, but also for me it felt like a very long time, especially like in the context of just saying your name. It's often expected, to say your name immediately. So to me, the stutter invited us into this specific form of fellowship where we were two strangers who were just like holding hands for at least 30 seconds in silence, like while other people are doing stuff and working and stuff. And to me it's like very very beautiful and very and like it's a moment that it was like probably 8 years ago, and I still remember it so vividly. And I don't know if they remember, but I really do. And it was such an intimate and vulnerable moment, because in other times when I'm stuttering my name, people like make fun of me, or they you know it's like the vulnerability leads to me being feeling some kind of pain. But in that scenario, it was like, yeah, it was just so beautiful, and I was so grateful for the way that they stay with me. So um, yeah. And I'll say one other thing, which is one of the things I'm interested too. As you said, I'm a performer, so I do a lot of concerts and things like that where I am, physically, or of course more in the pandemic, virtually gathered with other people. But I'm also interested in books and like in the forms of fellowship that books invite. And as
Mhm.
someone who writes books, I'm interested in books um, as solitary experiences, but also all the forms of collectivity that can be opened by books. Um, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think that's also something that I admire about your work is really this kind of interdisciplinary kind of cross media kind of approach. And so that's really exciting. I mean, also as all of this relates, what you were mentioning to your writing practice and and your scores too for these readings. So it ends up taking it out of, you know, uh, a more of a traditional kind of performance practice, and it expands it into publishing and expands it into, many more opportunities. I wonder if this is a good place where we could share one of your works, The Clearing, if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen. I think it's just a beautiful score, beautiful work. Maybe you could tell us a bit about this.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. Um, I I'll scroll to the top here. Yeah, so this is the clearing is go to the table of contents here. So it's a book and an album that came out in 2021. The book is published by Wendy Subway, an amazing, amazing, amazing organization based in Brooklyn. And it's yeah, it's a sister piece to an album. So you see side A, side B, side C, and side D. And the album was put out by the Poetry Project, another amazing organization in New York, and NNA Tapes. And each chapter of the book corresponds to each track of the album. There are 12. And as you were saying, yeah, the book is both a score and a transcription of the album. And I'll show just a little bit. It's so this is track one, chapter one, and so the um the designer of the book, Rissa Hochberger, incredible artist, designed this time system to where each page corresponds to 1 minute of the album. And so you see in real time, the italic text is basically alt text for the sound. It's a description, um, sometimes more literal, sometimes less literal, of the music. And this text here, the non-italicized text, is the words that I'm speaking and singing at different points. And my stutter is rendered in real time. So I stutter here on the syllable D at the start of the word. Disfluency for about 15 seconds. And so it goes on like this. And, you know, what starts to happen is you see that the stutters are rendered in just these lines of text. But what Rissa invited me to do was to uh, consider other shapes besides lines. So here the letters start to pulse
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
break apart and break their axes here, and then eventually they make all these different shapes, um, and eventually they culminate in a tree that my brother a Kelvin drew. Um, the tree is composed of all the syllables that I studied on in these 2 minutes of the album. And yeah,
Wow.
it's it's. Oh, you gonna say something, Jeff?
I was just going to say that's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, my I asked Kelvin for his help because I tried to draw a tree, and um you could not recognize as a tree. So I had to ask his help. He's an amazing visual as well as martial artist. Um and yeah, it's as I said, yeah, a score and a transcription. The score, in the sense that, if you were to hand this to a musician and ask them to play an interpretation of, and yet the piano below the voice is with us, more absorbed than heard, as the hilltops multiply. You know, of course, every different musician would probably create a whole different sound for this, and I love that. And of course, it's also, yeah, it's a transcription too, and I like how it, I feel like one of the things I'm interested in is just like the kind of circuit of like score, performance transcription, which leads into another score, which leads
Mm.
into further performance, and of course the unpredictability of the stutter itself. Here the stutter, there's about 4 seconds of stuttering on the letter T, and the T's become these ripples that fly across the page. But of course, if I were to read this right now, I have slipped out the back door of time and gone to the field. I'm absent. I'm already there. That was probably maybe that was a little more than 4 seconds. And another time I read it, I wouldn't stutter on it at all. So yeah, there's this kind of indeterminate indeterminacy that I quite like. And of course, I'm thinking of as you were saying earlier, different traditions within jazz. Mary Lou Williams will play a standard on Thursday night, and on Friday night, you might not even recognize it as the same standard at first. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, one question while you have this up, this is so amazing. So thank you for sharing it with us. Um, we talked earlier about or mentioned counterpoint and texture. I wonder if you could just kind of help us, understand that a little bit about what you're bringing these traditions of counterpoint into this.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, when I studied music as an undergraduate at Columbia, and I studied species counterpoint, this form of largely, or this form of composition that was very, very common in 16th, 17th centuries in Europe. And I studied with the amazing composer Ramin Arjamand, and he what like one of the things that I learned in counterpoint was the practice and the craft and all the beauties that can come forth from um, multiple melodies that are largely that are both autonomous and and intimately linked, and how to strike the balance between this autonomy and this intimacy. And my dear friend and amazing artist James Harrison Monaco has taught me a lot about practices in certain forms of polymetrical music in West African drumming, where when I listen to that music, I'm thinking also about the balance of autonomy and being intimately linked. But something that I'm very interested in this book, and in the book that I'm working on right now, is the presence of multiple streams of text that again are like autonomous and intimately linked, and how that can and I'm wondering if that can create for the reader a situation that is in some ways similar to how I feel listening to music from someone like Bach. Um, and so in this book there are of course there are these two streams that are going throughout. There's the italics, that's the alt text, and then there's the Roman text, this text. And it's something I like about it is that I interrupt myself. um, on the album, you'll be hearing me say, not just because Moses' name means to pull out of the water, when Moses, Moses, and Moses, and when Moses, Moses, when Moses went Moses. You'll hear me say that while hearing music, But in the book, this impediment is a flowing mountain. Those words don't appear on the album. In the book, I interrupt myself to where I say, not just because Moses' name means to pull out the water, impediment is a flowing mountain. When Moses, and so there's these kind of like, the text becomes, there are these like new meanings that arise from the text interjecting itself. So those are our two streams, and then of course there's the third stream of the stutters that, to me, these when I was making these remind me of birds.
Mm.
And so these birds are again not present on the album, but flutes circle the mountain like falcons. And there's these like birds that are formed from the stutters, so there's these forms of these, just like these points of contact among the streams. And then a fourth stream gets added after the tree. The tree is a turning point in the book. And then there's this fourth stream that this poem supplants the time markers. And so instead of having 425, 435, 445, at 455 we have verbs await the oral, and duration closes like corolla. We went to draw herb. And then from the rest of the book, the time markers have vanished, as if the poem is now the clock,
Nice.
And then the stutters turn into streaks of blue, and then the final page has a fountain in the shape of an octagon formed by stutters. So yeah, so I'm interested in the, as you were saying, the texture and the counterpoint as a way of like making, something that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's like, you know what I mean? Like there's this feeling when I'm listening to Bach, where it's not like, okay, there's this melody, and this melody, and it's like 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. When I'm listening to that music, it feels like 1 + 1 + 1 equals 111.
Yeah,
So
I know exactly what you mean. Thank you for sharing this. This is absolutely wonderful. We're going to add links for folks to kind of explore this on their own. I think as we kind of keep an eye on the time and wrapping up, I would love to kind of finish our time together with talking about your latest work and the work that you're working on right now, Aster of Ceremonies.
Aster of Ceremonies um, is, in some ways, it continues the clearing in some ways, in that it's investigating histories of Black disfluency and Black stuttering through an archive of newspaper notices for enslaved folks who have, in the words of the advertisements, who have run away from their enslavers. And a number of these newspaper advertisements or notices identify the enslaved people as speaking with stutter or stammer or a speech impediment of some kind. And so in this book, in order to kind of listen to these stutters that appear very briefly in these notices. They're usually very, very brief. They were very expensive to place, often in the newspaper, and they are very brutal in the information that they give. They usually just give the name of the enslaved person, what they were wearing, a description of their body, and a reward amount. And so through a writing practice that involves rearranging the words of those ads, I have been trying to just kind of linger with these glimpses of Black just fluency and how it intersects with fugitivity, with Black movement. And so this is just I'll show 2 pages from it. I'll read them. We kneel before you. The stutters will be harbors for years. Stutters, a false offense. The name shall bring back years when it returns. They play the stutter as a violin. Ancestor Brackenford, we kneel before you. Ancestor Hawthorne, we kneel before you. Ancestor Blackthorn, the rose of the stutter shall grow through the fence of prose. And so again, there's this, kind of counterpoint here where there's these 2 different streams of text happening. There's the score with this song that sings to a few different plants. These are plants, bracken fern, hawthorn, and blackthorn, that grow in and around London. And this other stream, the rose of the stutter shall grow through the fence of prose, and then these fragments up here, these are all composed by rearranging the words from an advertisement concerning an enslaved ancestor who ran away from London. So these are plants that ancestor may have seen living there. And, the practice becomes, a way of, again, like I was saying about, like hip hop artists, taking a 3-second recording of the Amen song, and stretching that recording to where you get a 30-second, you get a whole new 30-second sonic landscape. In an adjacent way, it feels like, for me, I'm interested in how just rearranging the words, breaks open the brutal, violent advertisement to try to find some other things. Yeah. So, and I'll show the cover real quick.
What a beautiful, powerful piece. Thank you for sharing a preview of this, Jerome.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Here's the cover here. It was designed by Mary Austin Speaker, and I'm so grateful for her work. The book is called Aster of Ceremonies, and this is an aster flower, and the aster comes because the word master appears in so many of the advertisements. So I rearrange words, but I also break words into fragments, and so a lot of the poems drop the M from master and linger with the asters. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you for spending, a few minutes with us, an hour with us. It's flown by as I have guessed early on. So, and also many thanks for all of our viewers for tuning in. We will share links to Jerome's website, his books and recordings. And I really, really encourage everyone to explore and spend some time with Jerome's work. It's so rewarding and powerful. And so thank you again, Jerome.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. This was a dream. Thank you so much for all your kindness and your care and your thought.